make a start. And the first one's almost certainly just popped up on your screen. It has on mine. This is to remind you that this session is being recorded. So you need to just say that you're happy for the session to be recorded, or if you're not happy, then of course there is an option to leave. So this session, like all our sessions, will be posted on YouTube later on today or in the next couple of days. And like all our sessions, it will be there free for you to download, go back to look at another time if you wish. So can I just ask all of you, if you would please, while we're doing the session, if you would turn your cameras off and if you would remain muted. But later on, right at the end of the session, we'll have Q&A time when you're very welcome to put your cameras on and to put your microphones on. And of course, you can use the chat at any time to ask questions, make comments, suggest resources, anything that you want to do. So we are recording. One last reminder, it's in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen that's in front of you at the moment, that the ideas expressed today are those of the speakers. And if you wish to use these ideas, we're thrilled to bits, but we would appreciate it if you'd acknowledge that the ideas and suggestions as the work of the authors and presenters who are presenting for us today. So please do use the chat. So that is all the protocols to go through. Today, we're looking at teaching about weather and climate, and we're delighted to have 4 people, all expert in this, with us. So first of all, we've got Tessa, Willy and Janet Davis from UCL, and they're talking about their fantastic new project, which is a web resource that they've been creating for the last year at least, maybe 18 months. Then we've got Paula Owens, who I know will be known to many of you for her fantastic work in a whole range of different areas of geography, perhaps especially her work for Digimap. And she's going to be talking about teaching about weather and climate in terms of progression. And then finally, for the first time, I'm very pleased to have with us David Preece from Teach First, who is talking about where weather and climate fit into the curriculum. And I know he's also got some fantastic resources to recommend. So just before we start that, I'm going to hand over to Tess. Tess not only is presenting one of our sessions today, but she also is the editor of the Primary Geography Editorial Board. So Tess, over to you.
Thank you very much, Julia, and thanks to everyone. Wonderful to be here today in 2 different guises, 2 different hats on. So this first off, as we do each session, is to talk about the latest issue of Primary Geography, and this is due out. This is imminent. Mid-September is literally on the horizon. So we're very excited to be welcoming the autumn 2023 issue. And it has a focus on tackling big ideas. And there are lots and lots of really helpful, lots of useful examples covering such a range of both age phases as well as interest and thematic areas. So we've got something on pupil voice. We've got a big section on SEND as well, and also early years. So two really key things we think there. Progression and assessment, of course, as well, another really critical area. Exploring big ideas through picture books, and also something on climate and sustainability. And another feature of this edition, which is really exciting, is we have a number of international authors as well, which I think gives a really good global perspective on it. So lots of things that are relevant to this particular GeogLive and also wider beyond that as well. So I think there's something for everybody there. We always welcome your feedback on this, and really like to hear about the ways in which you're using it, ways in which we can improve and develop. So do please keep in touch with us and let us know how you're using Primary Geography and how we can use it best. So that's Primary Geography, and we'd also like just to alert you to all the myriad resources on the Geography Association shop, resources specifically on weather and climate, Lots in the Leading Primary Geography, the handbook for primary teachers. Also in the Know series, weather, clouds, wind and precipitation, as well as climate, biomes and vegetation belts, and then investigating climate and biomes in the super schemes as well. So we've got lots and lots of stuff for you there, as well as all the free resources that are available for you on the shop there for the GA. So hopefully that covers that area. And I think we can move on, Anthony. Oh, and here I go again. So I'm not going to mute myself. Another part of my role in life in another guise is to work for UCL Institute of Education. I'm a teacher educator there with my colleague Janet Davis, who is also here today. It's fantastic to have you presenting as well, Janet, today. We've been working amongst other things, working with our initial teacher education students. We've also been working for the Centre for Climate Change and Sustainability Education, as Julia mentioned. We've been preparing resources for teachers, and we have focused, Janet and I have been focusing on how geography, specifically primary geography, is perfectly placed to teach about climate change and sustainability. And we've contributed to, I'm pleased to say, a free new professional development program called Teaching for Sustainable Futures. And Janet's going to just talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, thank you, Tessa. And it's really good to be here. Thank you so much for having us. We're going to share the links to the centre and to the CPD modules in the chat. And I know Tessa's got that sorted out. And we have some QR codes as well at the end of the presentation. So we could use those, you could use those too for looking at the CPD modules. Already available is a module which is about the power and potential of primary geography for teaching sustainable future. Which looks generally at that potential that geography has. And Tessa's going to start to tell us a little bit more about that in a minute. We also have available, we can mention history here, I think, just whisper it quietly. There is a module of a similar type as well about the potential of primary history for looking at sustainable futures. And the centre is bringing online this year English and Maths CPD, which will be available later this academic year, not this calendar year. For the geography modules, we've been so delighted to have the contributions of many familiar faces, and lots of them are here tonight, so that's lovely. Steve Rawlinson, Stephen Scoffham, Paula Owens, Helen Clark and Sharon Witt have all contributed and been so generous with their time. And it's brilliant to have had the support from Julia, Tanner as well. But even more importantly, you're all important, but you'll agree with me, I'm sure, that we've had also many inspiring contributions from teachers and children for the modules that we've been doing, which has been really exciting for us. But we do thank everyone for being so generous with their time. Next slide, please.
So from the start of designing the resources, we were inspired. I'm not sure if you're aware of Paula Zuccotti's work and something called Everything That We Touch, which showcases everyday items that we come into contact with all the time. I do recommend having a look at some of her works. It's fantastic and lots of potential. And we feel that the art really demonstrates the power of connections. And in our case, the potential of geography to show us those interconnections that exist all around us in the world that we live in, and help us to explain things like the weather and climate change, and understand the need for sustainability once we start unpicking these things. And in this example from the resources, I photographed those items that I came into contact with in my first 5 minutes of the day. There was a bit of discretion, I hasten to add, and we show through a series of hotspots, what they tell us about our everyday geographies, and what also geography tells us about our everydays. And this is something, of course, that children can easily do with due sensitivity, but drawing pictures, taking photos and things like that, and using those. Thanks, Anthony. So through the activity, we show how geography's key concepts, or those big ideas, and those are shown in figure 5 there from Kathleen and Willy, 2018. They help us to understand what happens at this this critical interface between human and physical worlds, and how those are inextricably interrelated and interdependent. So much so that we feel that there are no separate human and natural worlds. There's just one world where we are a part of nature and not apart from nature. And to exemplify that, we used the take one object. And I did just that. And I used, in this case, a banana. And through using a banana, an object such as a banana, we sort of identified those key geographical concepts: place, space, scale, interconnection, and so on, and used those to explain climate change and sustainability. And here we're focusing specifically on the weather and climate. And we can think about place, you know, where bananas grow, where they're grown, and that helps us to understand those geographical considerations of what the place is like, how the climate and other conditions enable us to grow them, as well as important social justice issues, such as the working conditions of those who produce the fruit, and also energy and transport questions, such as why it needs to travel so far to come to us and why we can't grow it at home. And then we can start considering the implications of that. So this evening, perhaps when we're finished, have a moment, think about an object that you came into contact with, and take the one object challenge with geography in mind, and thinking about the weather and climate in particular. Maybe get the children to do one as well tomorrow morning. Okay, thanks. Next slide, please, Anthony.
And one of the things that we particularly wanted to look at in the module was the way in which our everyday geographies give us a knowledge of the place we call home. We really wanted to start with those questions that we ask about our own places, with the concerns that we have about our places. And so we use, through the module, the Inquiry for Action framework to help teachers to think about the way in which we can support children to act on their questions and act on their concerns. And from that, to plan for action and carry out those actions within their community. Thanks, Anthony. And we see this as a real opportunity to empower children to become what we're calling citizen geographers, able to recognise issues and have confidence to find ways to take their own actions. And the children that we certainly have got featured in our module are passionate, they're informed, they're really enabled through inquiry, and they use their geographical skills to be real agents of change. And it's been so rewarding, actually, to work alongside them, to see what they have developed, to see that when they're enabled to act on their concerns, they can really step up and help their communities step into a better future as well. Thank you, Anthony.
Okay, so the citizen geographer can be informed to sort of hold optimism with realism, and through inquiry for action, find palpable solutions to those real issues of eco-anxiety and develop hope along the way. And I'm hoping, Anthony, if you press play, Emmanuel can tell us, one of our contributors is able to tell us his thoughts on that.
Unfortunately, it's not giving me access to that.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Well, we'll save that for another time. But he talks about his journey through sustainability. They did a wonderful project on plastics, reducing plastics in their school, and talked about it as a long journey going up a hill, and then getting to that place and being able to look from a different perspective, and how much they had learned from that experience. So I think it's salutary to hear from the children's voice as well as to the impact this kind of work has from them. Thanks, Janet.
Absolutely. He was, it's okay.
Oh, sorry, last slide, sorry.
You can go back, Anthony. That's fine, thank you. So yeah, he was so inspiring, Emmanuel. He gave us much food for thought, actually.
He did.
What's next anyway for us? Well, in our next short courses, we're looking at the way in which all of our key ideas can be embedded across the geography curriculum. So we're thinking about the way that knowing and caring for our place and inquiry for action and the citizen geographer will thread through examples of ways to teach different themes with a focus on climate change and sustainability. And the module that we have coming up next is going to be looking at the difference between weather and climate to understand what climate change is. And we're coming from that, from the first instance, by thinking about the way that nature is revealing how climate is changing. And the bee eaters of Norfolk feature quite substantially, actually, in our next module to show us the way in which local nature hooks can give us a hook into lesson sequences and prompt us to question what's happening around us and what actions we can take. Thanks, Anthony. So we start the weather and climate module by charting a possible sequence of activities, but we do want to say that it isn't a lesson plan that we're aiming to provide for people. What we're really aiming to do is to show a way that we can bring weather and climate studies into the classroom by providing a framework, but with room for local perspectives. So our framework starts with a hook, and that hook is an unusual local event linked to climate and nature and climate change. Some of you may be aware that the European bee eater usually nest in Portugal and the Mediterranean. They do wend their way on little exploratory missions a bit further north, and they come to the UK. Probably there will be some each year that arrive at the UK. But last year, Norfolk had a successful nest of European bee eaters. The birds fledged and headed off on their southward migration. And then three of the bee eaters returned again this year. And although they weren't successful again this year, their return suggests that something is changing in the birds' behavior. And it's agreed that climate changes are a factor in that behavior change. And it's a unique event, that one, that the bee eaters returned. They have had successful nest sites across the UK before, but this return to the same nest site has been a unique event. So really starting to demonstrate that perhaps there is change happening. Similar hooks can be found all across the UK, and in the news just the other day, there was a mention of crystal jellyfish, I don't know if you saw that, being sighted in larger numbers off the coast of Cornwall, and they're drifting from their Mediterranean home, indicating again warmer waters. And perhaps you've got a nature hook local to you, which you could share in the chat, actually, if you do, if this sparks an idea, or if you've been to see the Norfolk bee eaters. Certainly there are lots of people who've been and enjoyed seeing them, and I saw them this year, which was great. Using the nature hook has led us to look at how we can chart climate change then using natural indicators. And we move on from exploring one particular hook into looking at a wider look at indicators through looking at phenology and nature's calendar. And we've been joined on the module by the Woodland Trust for helping us with that. And also with Helen and Sharon from Attention to Place, who have given us some great connections from pedagogies of attention with distance drifting, and the way that we can pay attention to what's around us and how it helps us to notice what's changing and start to explore the reasons why in our own local area. Thank you, Anthony. And we then consider how we can use data. So we move from the nature hook and the nature look, if you like, to consider how we can use data about the local weather, whether we collect it ourselves, whether we use weather stations, whether we use data that's collected by others like the Met Office, and how we can create local weather recordings to help us talk about trends and patterns. And here we've got some examples of ways schools in the UK and in Pakistan have recorded temperature and rain through the months of May and June this year. And the schools were really keen to show that there are different ways to encourage children to talk about and to record patterns in weather and the data that they collect, and with the potential to collect data across a longer time scale and to then begin to make comparisons across places. And I'm sure you'll agree they're not only really attractive, but the conversations the children had, and they really thought about designing those for themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And the final stage is an inquiry for action. So we look at an inquiry for action. Thank you. Highlighting local actions in response to the weather within a community garden, where the sightings of a new spider on the block prompted curiosity and questions. And if you want to hear more about that, you're going to have to engage with our next module, which we'd really like you to do. And also you can ask our next speaker, Paula, because it's her community garden. So we're going to be looking at that in more detail. And this is a perfect example, really, of citizen geographers working together, using their understanding to develop sustainable futures. Thank you, Anthony. Just the last slide, which is our QR codes for some research that's recently been carried out, and a further one with a link to the Teaching for Sustainable Futures. We hope that's given you a few ideas at looking at weather and climate, underpinned by thinking about climate change and sustainability, as well as some prompts for inquiry and engaging and empowering the children that you teach. So thank you very much. We'd love feedback on this. We really do hope that you will engage with the modules, and even the history one as well. It's pretty good.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Tessa and Janet, for that introduction to what sounds like an absolutely brilliant resource. It's obviously moved on since I last had a proper look, so that sounds really fantastic. I love the idea of citizen geography. It's really great. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So, Paula, can we move on to you? That's right, that's your first slide on the screen. So I'm going to hand over to you, Paula.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you for having me this afternoon. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. What a fascinating start, Tess and Janet. Thank you so much. It's really important to think about children as active agents. Climate change and the climate crisis is arguably our most pressing challenge that we face at the moment. And just a look at any kind of data and what's going on in the world this week, for example, with unprecedented heat waves, not least in the UK, terrible flooding and hurricanes, and of course in the last couple of days, that horrendous catastrophe in Libya, in the city of Derna, where they now think more than 20,000 people may have lost their lives. So geography really matters, and the underpinning knowledge that enables children to come to understand what is happening really matters, and that starts with learning the basics of weather and climate. So I'm just going to kind of give some overview about that this afternoon and just kind of highlight some ideas that may be useful in thinking about how you can build it into your curriculum, thinking about some progression as well. Thanks, Anthony. And of course, in Key Stage 1, we had to teach children about the weather. The weather and the seasons feature very strongly. So what is the weather like? What is the kind of vocabulary that we need to use? This is really important. And I would suggest when I was at school, we chose to teach about the weather throughout the year in short, sharp bursts, perhaps looking at a week here and there at different seasons, so that once the children were secure in that weather understanding and that useful vocabulary, they could start to make connections about the kind of weather patterns you would normally expect with seasonal change, and building that in with seasonal walks, lots of field work as well. So that's a really key starting point. Thank you, Anthony. Introducing map work, of course, a key part of geography. This is from a school where I was working with last year, talking about just simple recording at a local scale, so you can use the school grounds, year one, getting year one to go outside, use some weather data, simple instruments, measure the temperature at the same time every day, thinking about where that is recorded. So you'd be surprised, I think, just how different that temperature measurement might be. And you can ask children why that, you know, if they can account for that. Is it because one area is more exposed? Which way is the wind blowing? You know, where is it protected from buildings? So you can start to quickly delve into quite tricky geographical thinking just through some very simple exploration and very simple field work. Thank you, Anthony. And I took this, oh, sorry, if you can go back. I took this from Neve. I have got permission to use it. It was on Twitter the other year. And I thought it's just such a lovely picture of her Year 1 children working to talk about the UK map. So again, expanding from the local scale to a national scale and learning to use those weather symbols and the language that goes with it. Thank you. And then as children get to move from Key Stage 1 into Key Stage 2, to still thinking about that key map work, and they begin to develop a familiarity with the UK as a whole as well, they can begin to start looking at some simple maps. And these come from the Met Office, who've got an abundance of data that is really useful and, of course, free to use. And they can start thinking about, well, you know, why? What are the variations here and what's happening? What does the data actually tell us? So if we look at the mean data over the annual average of this period, then we can see that the concentrations of colour show that the temperature on average was much higher in the south than it was in the north. So children can use their atlases, they can start to make connections between the topography of the UK, where the mountains are, and start to pull out the difference between altitude. It gets colder as you get higher, of course. So we can start to talk about that influence. And if we look at the rainfall, we can see more patterns there. We can see the influence of the Highlands and Scotland as well, where the heavier rainfall is. We can also see an east-west divide, where it's much drier generally in the southeast along the east coast there, and generally wetter along the west coast. So we can start to talk about where the prevailing winds come in from the southwest across the Atlantic Ocean, bringing the most rain. And of course, how when the rain comes over land and meets the mountains, we get the most precipitation. So we can start to explain, you know, that more complex thinking. Thank you. And then, of course, when we get to Year 3, we might want to start looking at climate zones straight away. Climate zones is quite a complex idea, but I would say it's quite useful to introduce it as soon as possible because it underpins so much else in geography. And you can keep revisiting in more complex kind of aspects as well, which is, you know, good practice. So I'm just showing an extract from the In the Know Geography Guide that's downloadable PDF from the Geographical Association, which has got lots of useful information about climate, biomes and vegetation belts. And I'm just going to mention this huge misconception that I know some people, some children tend to think of, which is that it's hotter at the equator because it's nearer the sun. And of course, what's really important is thinking about the elliptical orbit of the Earth around the sun and thinking about the tilt of the Earth. And you can model this with torches and footballs or balloons or whatever, because the energy is more concentrated over the equator. So the same amount of energy is more concentrated over a smaller area than it is at the polar regions, where you can see from this diagram, it's more spread out. So that energy has to work a lot harder, hence the cooler temperatures there. So just, you know, getting that underpinning understanding. Thank you. This is also from the In the Know guide, and this is a very, very simplified map of temperature zones. Now, of course, in Key Stage 1, you've been doing some Earth geometry as well. You've been teaching children about the North and South poles, where the equator is, so they should have that secure knowledge. So it's really nice, perhaps in Year 3, you can directly build on that and introduce more of the major lines of latitude, introduce Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn to build on what they already know, and get this general idea that generally the temperature increases towards the equator and is cooler at the poles. Of course, that doesn't always hold true because we've got other factors, but it's a good general understanding to have. If we think about altitude, for example, that explains why Kilimanjaro is near the equator, but yes, you do get snow in Africa at Christmas time. So really important to think about that too. Thank you. I'm going to look at Digimaps now. And Digimaps is really useful because it's got some layers that you can toggle on and off so children can explore for themselves and make connections. Now, the difference between weather and climate, a nice little way of saying it is weather is what you get, climate is what you expect. And the Met Office say that climate is normally what you expect to get using measurements, many measurements taken over at least a 30-year period. That's the kind of gold standard. So I've used on Digimaps in 1970 to 2000. There is, of course, more up to date from 2000 onwards, but it's not a 30-year period. So I'm looking just at the climate expectations here. And we can see the temperature differences. And thank you, Anthony. If you click the next toggle, it should highlight the equator and tropics. So when you're using Digimaps, get children to highlight that so we can start to look at those connections and see where the hottest temperatures are. Of course, they're in the tropics. We can look at those colours and talk about why Antarctica is a much deeper blue than the Arctic region. Of course, it's because it's land, and land has a different effect on holding the temperature than water does, because the Arctic is mainly water, and of course the Antarctic is a continent, mainly continent. And then if we toggle again, we can overlay it with, just keep going, Anthony, it should, we've got the key for the precipitation, and do it again, it should change the average rainfall. And so then we can get children to notice that over that period, most of the rainfall falls again within the tropics. So we've got hottest weather and wettest weather within the tropics. We can start to talk about tropical rainforests now and why they happen. We can see where the deserts fall, and the deserts are falling on the outside of the tropics. So most of them, the deserts fall, but the cold deserts, of course, we've got Antarctica, which is a cold desert inland. So lots of useful conversations we can have using that. Thank you, Anthony. And then we can overlay it with the layer of vegetation. And if you click again, we should get the key come up. And we can start to talk about, we can notice where the Amazon is, and we can notice where the Congo is and the Indonesian rainforests. So we can start to make connections. Thank you, Anthony. And then you can talk about biomes, the differences between different kinds of deserts, different kind of rainforests, because of course they may have different kind of animals. So in this little simple quiz, for example, it might be easy if you want to have a quick go at matching up some of the biomes with the photographs. But if we think about number 4, which is Antarctica, we very clearly can see there that if we had an image with polar bears in it, it wouldn't match, for example, because we only get polar bears in the Arctic. Although it's a similar climate zone, it has very different animals to talk about. Thank you. So I'm racing through this, so I don't want to take up too much time. So here's an overview, just a suggestion of how you might like to think about using progression in your curriculum. I would say lots of weather activities, lots of walks and fieldwork in your school grounds in year 1, building that out to understanding more about the weather across the UK, and of course cementing that geometrical understanding, north and south poles and equator. Think about north and south and using different kinds of maps. And then I would think introduce climate zones fairly early on. It fits nicely with the water cycle and rivers, and of course where people live. That's a huge impact on where people can live, and look at where the settlement is around the world. And then you can revisit that, go on to talk about natural resources, food and farming. Perhaps in your regional studies, you can look in more depth at different kinds of biomes, perhaps at taiga, or lots of people choose to look at the Amazon, for example, when looking at rainforests. And then it helps you to understand more securely trade patterns and energy, of course, later on in year 6. So that's just one example of how it might work. Thank you, Anthony. Ofsted say it's really important to use facts, but also to have a sense of place, to build on places. So when we give examples of what the weather and climate is like in a particular place, it's really good to overlay that with some stories. Thank you, Anthony. And sadly, at the moment, if you look anywhere in the news, I use The Guardian quite a lot, you will get photographs of some climate disasters that are happening as a result of the climate crisis. And you can pull out from that some witness statements, often some useful maps. So I've just pulled this out from the recent floods in Greece that gives you something to talk about and make the experience real for children, help it to come alive. That's from the floods in Larissa in central Greece. Thank you, Anthony. I would also say tell powerful stories of the crisis, but in positive ways. There's lots of positive work going on, and Ashton site's got some really great stories, such as this about the cooling in Colombia, in one of the cities medallion in Colombia. Anthony, you'll have to click twice now to stop YouTube starting. And my last slide is just a reminder that there is an issue of primary geography dedicated to weather and climate, with a weather and climate glossary as well, and lots of great stories, not least this one of children with profound learning difficulties accessing work about the weather. Thank you very much. That's me done.
And thank you very much indeed, Paula. Thank you so much for bringing such a wide range of ideas and resources to us. There's lots and lots for everybody to follow up in your presentation. That's just fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, the recent weather highlights so very strongly how very urgent the matter of climate change is. Every child in every school today is going to be acutely aware of this. So the importance of us providing some positive stories and some information that can help them understand what's going on just can't be overemphasized, I think. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Right, I'm just going to check, is there anything in the chat we could pick up now? Anybody from GeogLive? Is there anything in the chat, or shall we move straight on? No, looks like we can move straight on. Okay, in that case, I'm very pleased to introduce David from Teach First, who's going to talk to us about weather and climate in the curriculum as a companion piece to the work we've already seen today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julia. So what I want to do today is just to talk about some of the ways in which we can see how this journey connects to what your children are going to go on to, or the range of pathways that they might experience depending on the school that they go to in Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. So if we have a look at the next slide, we can probably skip the objectives bit, to be honest, Anthony, and we'll just talk about what happens next, because keep going. When we teach weather and climate, that becomes a big umbrella term, pun not intended, for actually a number of smaller topics that we might break it down to when we're teaching at primary level or we're teaching at secondary level. And I think it's really important to recognize when we're looking at this, that what you construct as a weather and climate curriculum for your students might be the same as they're experiencing at secondary, and it might be completely different. There's a number of topics here that are under the weather and climate banner. Local weather, we've seen people talking about earlier, processes and types of rainfall, UK climate studies. We've seen all of those resources today. And we've also seen ideas about extreme climates or global climate patterns and climate biomes. We can start at Key Stage 4 and they start looking at hurricanes or extreme examples from climates that aren't our own, extreme weather patterns. Perhaps we might pick up some of these ideas of flooding, climate change impacts and solutions. And I think what's really important, if we just have a look at the next slide, is to recognize that very few schools will have a single route way through all of those topics. Some schools will cover all of those topics in different units. Some schools will do them in a particular sequence, but not others. They might start with weather and climate of the UK and do all of the UK bits and go from UK normal to UK patterns to UK extreme and just have a UK climate section in Year 7. And then they might scale up in Year 8 and do global climate patterns as part of a deserts unit, or as part of a biomes unit, or as part of a vegetation of the world unit. Or they might do a regional study on Africa and look at African climate patterns. And I think, like you guys, what's important to recognize is that there's lots of pathways through. As geography teachers at secondary level, just like you at primary level, we are constructing that curriculum based on the children in front of us, based on our contexts and what we know, and based on the discussions of what resources we've got available and how we want to pick our way through. And there's no real consistency at secondary level. We'd love to say that the national curriculum means that everyone does the same thing. It doesn't. We'd love to say that at secondary level, everyone's really confident in their teaching of weather or climate change. They're not. And you know, Tessa's work and UCL's CCSE work shows us the variation of confidence in climate teaching. Teachers of all phases are looking at it going, oh, I'm not sure. And we've seen that Tessa's work from UCL. There's a number of climate education programs now. We'll see what happens with the natural history GCSE in a couple of years' time. There's a number of ways that schools at secondary level are trying to bring in better resources. So if I can, I'd like to spend a little bit of time just sharing with you some of the good resources that exist. So, oh, Anthony's got me to share a screen already. I was going to do the overview first, but we'll do as we want.
Shall I make you host so we can go for it?
Go for it. Let's talk about the weather. My students used to know that I was doing this all the time, and I'm a huge fan of this website. There's a number of them that are similar, but this is earth.nullschool.net. It's a free browser-based website. It allows anyone to access it from any computer. You don't need a membership, a subscription, login, anything. And I think it's one of the best things we can do to turn weather and climate, which can either be what we can see outside of our window right now, or really big ideas about climate change, into something that we can play with and experiment with. So I just want to show you some stuff. In the links and in the resources there's some user guides and some documents, but this is, I think, one of the best inventions of the last 10 years for teaching, and I love it to pieces. It's like Google Earth. It's an interactive browser-based thing. You can click and drag and pull around the Earth in any way that you want. And you can see, what you can see on it right now is surface level wind patterns live across the world. So you can see the 2 hurricanes that are out in the North Atlantic as they're developing. And if we zoom in a bit, we can really get to grips with what those wind patterns are. We can do some really interesting looks at clicking on it and saying, well, how fast is the wind going? And how fast is the wind going over here? And how do we compare those things? What makes this more than just a really, really lovely toy is the interaction that you can have with the different layers. So if you click down here in the bottom left corner and click on the Earth button, it brings up a menu of everything you can look at. And all of this data is being fed in from live satellites, from measurements, from forecasting models all around the world, and it is up to date within the last sort of half an hour. So it's constantly being updated, and it lives in this incredible user space. So we might want to explore the relationship, as someone else was talking about earlier, between sea surface temperatures and this. So we might look at the oceans instead of the atmosphere. And if we look at the oceans, we can see the waves and the wave heights that the hurricanes are pushing up. There's our storm swell at 10 meters out. We can also look at the sea surface temperatures, or even the sea surface temperature anomalies, looking at how unusually hot it is in the North Atlantic, which is why we're getting so many hurricanes right now. When we're thinking about things like our climate biomes, if we go back to our air model, we might want to look at the temperatures across the planet right now. So there's live temperatures across Northern Europe. You can see Britain is thankfully a lot cooler than it was before, but we're seeing those heat waves pushing down into North Africa. So Libya, Tunisia at 32 degrees, right in the heart of the Sahara, it's 43. We're talking about Antarctica earlier. How cold is it down there at the moment? Well, we've got live temperatures of minus 52. And if we want to change the way that we're seeing the world, we can switch to the world map view, the equirectangular view, and you can see the whole world in one go. And this is just such a powerful way of teaching our children about the fact that the world's weather and climate is live and doing so much. We're talking about the influence of altitude earlier. Pick out the mountains. We can pick out the patterns of weather and all of these amazing things. And if you go into playing with it, there's a bunch of great fun you can have. For example, we could poke up into the atmosphere and we can have a look at the wind patterns where the jet stream is. Having really good fun about why does it take us 8 hours to fly to New York, but only 6 hours to fly back when it's the same distance. And we're really starting to use the atmosphere as a tool to be able to explore these things. Let's go back to making you a host, Anthony, and then I can share some of these. I can share some of these resources and some of these links with you instead of just this just playing with this website, which I can do for days at a time.
Thanks, David. So fascinating, though. The first time you showed me that, I was just wowed by it. It's really, really fascinating.
I think the thing that wows me most is the fact that someone's made it for free. Like, why would you give that away? So the link here, there's a user guide which I've put together of how to navigate the menus and the components of that. If you click on the link, if you click onto the next slide, you can see the way that you connect that to the work that that we were talking about earlier, the data sets that you've got from the Met Office. You can go onto there and get any time, any map you want to, and you can go back to different times in history if you want to. If you're studying a particular flood, or if you're looking at a particular climate event, then you can go back and get the data as it was, which is incredible, and a wonderful resource. Next one up is Anthony and I were discussing this, and we were trying to work out whether we think it works. I'd be really interested to see whether you guys have a play with it. And if you do, let me know, get in touch with me, let me know how you've used it. It's a simulator for climate change scenarios for the future. And at its simplest level, you pull different levers and see what happens to the world's climate in the future. You can use this. It's an incredibly well simulated resource from people like MIT and Harvard, and you can use this with kings and prime ministers to run a 3-day workshop of exactly what policies are we going to do, Your Eminence. Or you can do it for 5 minutes of, you've got 5 minutes to make the world a better place, which 10 things are you going to pick? We were talking about empowering climate action earlier. This is one of the most powerful ways I've ever seen to say, you know what, it is possible to fix this if we pull the right 10 levers. Thanks, Anthony. So I've pulled together some resources. There's a number of things I want to highlight, but I think the most important one, the GA and the RGS are wonderful from a geography perspective. And of course, I'm always going to encourage you to look at those. But if you are looking for support with how do you get comfortable with weather and climate, I cannot give you a better set of resources than the Royal Meteorological Society's MetLink, which is their set of resources designed for teachers and parents to do all sorts of things. Teacher resources, there's a link there. There's a complete section for experiments and practicals that you can run in your classroom. How do you make a cloud in a balloon? How do you use all kinds of exciting things? There's even an online course on their Future Learn website where you can learn more about the climate yourself, guides to field work and practical stuff. And if you apply in enough time, the Met Office will even loan you meteorological equipment. They will loan you balloons and kit and all kinds of, weather instruments if you want them. The best thing I can say to get hold of is that Weather and Climate Teachers Guide. It's genuinely brilliant. It's a free resource. It's like a little textbook for teachers of how do you teach these things, a load of resources associated with it. And it's designed as a choose your own adventure. So you pick the topics that are interesting to you, or that are reflective there. Anthony's popped those links in the chat. I'm not going to talk you through all of those. But I hope that gives you a helpful steer on some of the ways that the work you're going to be doing is going to be built on by your colleagues in secondary schools, and some resources for you to have a play and enjoy in the classroom. If you use stuff, or if you want to get in touch with me, then my contact details are on the next slide, and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks ever so much for inviting me along tonight. I hope that's been helpful.
Thank you, David. That's been absolutely great. It's always really good to think about the links between primary and secondary. We're very keen to do that here. And you've shown us a couple of fantastic looking resources that I can't wait to go and play with myself. They look absolutely fantastic, 2 of those. So thank you very much indeed for coming along tonight. Okay, GeogLive team, is there anything in the chat we need to be answering?
No, Julie, I think it's just a lot of appreciation for all of the information that's been shared and all of the resources. So the links have all been put in the chat as well. So if you wanted any of those links, then they are there. But it's just a lot of people saying thank you and appreciation for how wonderful all of those resources and all of the information and all of the ideas that have been shared tonight are.
Well, that's great to hear, Kate. Thank you very much indeed for monitoring that. I'm afraid I can't manage to monitor it while I'm doing this as well, but that's great. Thank you. So one member of the GeogLive team has taken to putting together a fantastic resource and another fantastic resources, which is to create a Canva on each of the themes that we're doing. So Anthony, I think you're going to be talking to this, unless Sophie, you're there and you want to do it yourself. I haven't seen you, but pop up now if you want to do it yourself, Sophie.
I'm here, but I'm happy for Anthony to talk about it if that's okay.
That's
Of course.
perfect, Sophie. Yeah. Okay, Anthony.
So nice to hear from you, Sophie, and thank you so much for sharing this. So I'm sure you've had time to scan the screen, or I will put that link later on to Sophie's Canva. You can see Sophie's contact details there. And we do thank you, Sophie, for putting this together. This is just some screenshots from this Canva, which gives you some really good, high quality fiction and non-fiction text that you might want to use across early years, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So I'll just kind of flick through those so you can see them on the screen. You might know some of these, but equally, if you've got some other books that you know, I was looking on my shelves earlier on at some of the books that I've used in the past, sometimes some very simple board books for children, some very visually rich books that really stimulate that discussion and what if and what might vocabulary is really, really useful. So huge thanks for putting this together. There's lots of books that really do develop those ideas around climate action. We've talked about that several times already, haven't we? How they can become citizen geographers, citizen activists. So do have a look at some of these books on the Canva, and certainly some really inspiring fiction books there, as you can see, from people like Alistair Humphreys and others. So great things to look at. And like I say, if you know of other books, we'd really love to hear from you on those. So I'll just flick back to give you the scanning tool. There's more books on the Canva that you can have a look at. And like I say, I'll put the link into the chat a little bit later. So thanks very much, Sophie.
Yes, thank you, Sophie, very much indeed for doing that. It's a fantastic thing that you've offered to do and indeed are doing. So thank you so much. I'm sure everybody will find that invaluable. And thank you, Anthony, for taking us through it today. So it just remains for me now to do a few concluding things. First of all, I want to thank all of you who have joined us today. It's lovely to see so many people here. I've seen many names I recognise, but also some people I think have joined us for the first time. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it useful. Thank you, of course, to our contributors, Tess, Janet, Paula and David. We're very grateful for you giving up your time to come here and share your fantastic work with teachers. That's really, really much appreciated. Thank you. And of course, thank you, GeogLive team, who are utterly fantastic. Anthony, Steve, Kate, Sophie and Jen. Jen isn't here today, but she is usually. Thank you all very much indeed for what you've done. Just to remind you that the Geographical Association Annual Conference, can we get back to that, Anthony, or have we lost it? Anyway, I can tell you, the Geographical Association Annual Conference this year will be on the 4th to the 6th of April. It's in Manchester this year. It will be lovely to see lots of people there. As it's in the north, it's lots of opportunity for those of us from the north to be there. And there's a QR code on your screen, which is to find out more information about the Geographical Association as an association and about membership. We do free primary membership for individuals, and of course there is full membership for individuals and for schools. And finally, if we just go to the last screen, Anthony, thank you very much indeed. We do have an archive of all our previous GeogLive sessions. There are now 15. Today was GeogLive 16. They cover, as you can see from the screen, all sorts of different topics, everything from early years geography to fieldwork, to teaching about cold landscapes, using maps, Ofsted input. We've had lots and lots of different and very interesting and useful sessions. Between them, they've had thousands and thousands of views in the last 18 months, which is absolutely great for us to know that people are finding these things useful enough to download them. So if you just go to our YouTube channel, which you can see the link is on the screen there, you go to the YouTube channel, you'll be able to access any of these. They all last an hour, but of course you can always pick out individual contributions if you want to. Most contributions are 10 to 12 minutes. So is there anything in the chat we need to pick up? I can see a lot of messages appeared since I last looked. Is there anything, GeogLive team, that I need to be responding to, or that we could respond to? Doesn't sound like it.
It's people saying thank you and sharing more resources. So.
That is fantastic. It's one of the things we know people really love about GeogLive sessions. Everybody really likes to get recommendations for really good resources. So please do continue to do that. It's one of the things we're very keen to promote. There are so many fantastic resources out there, and we want everybody to know about them. Okay, so I'm just going to finish by saying thank you again to everybody who's come tonight and everybody who's contributed, and to the GeogLive team who work very hard behind the scenes to bring you our GeogLive sessions, and to remind you that the next GeogLive is going to happen on the 8th of November. It's 5 p.m. It's another Wednesday. It's 5 to 6 p.m. as usual, and our theme that day is going to be teaching the UK. We know that that's an area that a lot of people have asked for support with, so we've decided to take that particular bull by the horn and to run a session on teaching the UK in November.
And Julia, I can exclusively reveal we have a participant from Wales who's going to be taking part, and from Northern Ireland on that date. We haven't yet got a definite volunteer from Scotland. So if anybody knows of somebody in Scotland who does some units of work that really do cover Scotland, that maybe look at the nation from a Key Stage 1 perspective particularly, we'd really love to hear from you. We don't know if we're going to have participants from England taking part, but again, if you do a really good England geography Key Stage 1 theme, drop us a tweet, drop us an email, and we'd love to hear from you, because we'd love to present your work during that session. But currently it's about Wales and Northern Ireland. It might be about the other nations if we get participants. So look forward to seeing you there.
Okay, that's great, Anthony. Good to have that that update. And we'd love your feedback. You can see our Twitter handle is on the screen in front of you. So if you've got comments to make, please do share them there. And it's just about 6 o'clock, so perfect timing as always, team. Thank you very much indeed. So we'll say goodbye. I hope you all have a great evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in November. Thank you all very much indeed.